As Good as Dead. A Fort Smith Tale. By Chris Lowry. Copyright 2020. Grand Ozarks Media. All rights reserved. Chapter 1. Eldridge sat up in the saddle and glared at the distant horizon. He could see two figures on horseback on a ridge at the edge of his vision. At least he hoped that's what they were. He had made that mistake with a grove of trees a few hours ago. Nope. He was right this time. They weren't trees. They were moving. It had to be the Brown boys. Gus and Pete Brown. Two faces on a wanted flyer in the pocket of his long leather duster. Black-hearted killers and robbers. Soon to be dead men if he could only catch them. The two had ridden through the day, cutting back and forth across the pine-covered valley and wind-scrubbed shale ridges. Eldridge had kept them in sight. Most of the time. They spotted us, he told his horse. Those were his first words aloud since leaving Fort Smith almost a week prior. He had no more words since then, no need for them. He didn't think he would need them once he caught up with the miscreants. Eldridge planned to shoot the two men. The warrant in his pocket read dead or alive. He figured two bodies strapped over the backs of a couple of horses wouldn't cause a lot of fuss. No one fussed much when the law killed baby killers. He took out his Henry repeating rifle and sighted along the barrel. Too far. The shadow outlines were little more than blurs. He could take a shot. Maybe hit one of them. Maybe not. Eldridge rested the rifle across his long legs and kicked his heels into his horse, spurring it onward. If he got closer, he could be sure the shot counted. The path in front of him was little more than a game trail. The ground was churned and broken from the passage of the first two horses. He clucked his tongue and urged his mount forward. They slipped between the trees and topped the slippery slope. Eldridge ducked under a low-hanging branch when it hit him. He heard the crack of the rifle as he fell. He hit the ground hard. Shale disintegrated and broke loose under him as the Henry twirled into the underbrush. Eldridge slid down the ridge in a rolling tumble of shattered rock and grunted curses. He slammed against the bole of a small tree that arrested his fall and watched his spooked horse gallop down the hill and disappear further up the narrow dale. "Son of a bitch," he hissed, unsure if he was speaking of the animal or his predicament. Both, he decided. Hot slick blood coated one aching shoulder in a crimson sticky mess that burned like a poker straight from the fire. His side hurt from the fall and he felt a sharp pain where he hit the tree when he tried to take a breath. It took 3 tries to roll himself upright and rest his back against the tree, and another few moments to wait for his breath to catch up. The sound of hoof beats echoed down from the top of the ridge and he spied his quarry coming back to check the results of their ambush. They weren't alone. 2 turned into 6 and doubled again. A gang of outlaws, miscreants and ne'er-do-wells. He rolled back to his side and tried to put a few trees between him and the men on the ridge. Eldridge crawled. He could only use one arm and even that was a struggle. The mangy curs that took a pot shot at him didn't have the damned courtesy to make sure the wound in his shoulder and the busted rib were on the same side. He dug the tips of his boots against the dirt and shoved his battered body between the trees. It was slow going. Every effort was agony. The movement sent waves of pain that cascaded down his side. He could feel the warm wet drizzle of blood coursing out of the hole in his shoulder. Hoof beats clattered on the game trail a dozen yards behind him. Eldridge slithered behind a fallen log. He could hear the voices of the men hunting him. "Where did the son of a bitch go?" "Did you get him, Earl?" said another. "I thought you said you shot him." "I did," Earl answered. "Got him clean." "Then where is he?" "His horse went that way." "He wasn't on his horse," one said. "Else we would have seen him." "Then where is he?" the other one repeated. "Lot of churn right here. Maybe he got dragged off with his horse." You boys spread out and look further down. Breathing hurt. He tried to keep his breath shallow, not only to stay quiet but to stop the pain. It didn't help much. He wanted to pack the wound in his shoulder, staunch the flow of blood. Movement would only betray his position. Movement was the enemy. Even as the men hunting him moved away, he knew 1 or 2 of them might be smart. The quiet ones, probably. The war taught them that. Look for the lines, things that seemed out of place. Shoot it. He remembered that training well. Hours spent on the ass end of a long gun, buried under branches and leaves and natural cover. Days spent waiting for just the right moment. Just the right second. Just the right shot. He had taken 56 of them. Enough to earn a reputation. Enough to be a legend. A legend under a log, he almost laughed and caught himself just in time. Laughing would make him move. Movement would get him caught. Movement would get him killed. If only he could take a breath, a full breath, he could clear his head and think. Think his way out. Eldridge closed his eyes and drifted away. Chapter 2. It was dark when he opened his eyes. His tongue was thick with thirst, his body racked with pain. Memory leaked in slow. He turned his head and spied figures sitting around a small campfire a few hundred yards from where he lay. "We got him," one said. "I know I did." "Then why ain't we found him?" "Soon as it's first light, we gonna spread out and search again. Can't find no dead man in the dark." "I got that square crow-looking son of a bitch," the first voice muttered again. "He ain't nothing but a tin star straw man. That tin star would shot every single one of us if he caught up with us," said Pete Brown. Eldridge recognized his voice. "But he ain't caught up with us, did he?" The first voice countered. "I shot him dead. We ain't seen a body. He ain't dead yet." "As good as dead then." Orange and yellow flames danced against the shadows. 12 of them, 3 to a side, as far as he could make out. Eldridge took a breath and winced. The pain was still there. He could smell smoke from the fire and the crisp tank of fried bacon and beans. His stomach gurgled a complaint and he wished for water to quiet it down and wet his tongue. Water or whiskey? Both were on his horse and she was long gone. Short barks of laughter reached him from the fire. Eldridge ran his hand down the length of his body and felt the familiar worn feel of his leather holster. 6 shots. That's all he could use. His other gun was useless. He couldn't move that arm. 12 men that needed killing. 6 bullets to do the job. He wondered if he could get them to line up ear to ear and how far he could send a shot through if they did. He suspected there were some questions best left unanswered. The answer he did need was how best to remove himself from his current predicament. Outnumbered. Injured. Unhorsed. He took another shallow breath. He had been in each situation before. Never at the same time. Eldridge caressed the grip of his pistol. There was no use in laying around feeling sorry for himself. He glanced at the ridgeline above and the fire below. He could make a run for it over the ridge. Or crawl for it. Eldridge didn't think he would make it too far. Up and over in another place to hide before they started hunting him again at sunup. What he needed was a horse. A horse could get him to a trading post and they could send for a doctor or medicine or both. No horse over that ridge. Least not that were as easy to find as 12 tethered below. Which direction to go did not seem like such a large decision after that. The Marshal was a survivor long before he pinned a star to his chest. He eased up on the elbow of his good arm and bit back a groan of pain. Crawling was going to hurt, but at least going downhill, he had gravity to help. Chapter 3. Eldridge used his knees and elbow to ease down the hill. He wasn't sure what the plan was, not yet. Get down. Get a horse. Get away. Sounded easy enough. It might work. Maybe shoot a couple of the bastards around the fire on the way out. It took time. In the war, he learned to move slow. In the dark, on this night, he had no choice. Moving slow was the only option. Still, the necessity didn't make it easy. He angled away from the fire, scraping along inches at a go. Every time he planted his elbow, a jolt of white-hot pain lanced through his chest. It took what little wind he had away and left him huffing in quiet agony. He didn't know how he would climb a horse when it came time. "Did you hear that?" The voice stopped him cold. One of the figures near the fire stood and lifted a leg. He let loose a rolling twitter aimed at a second man's head. "Better out than in," he cackled. "Go on then." The recipient of the ill wind took a half-hearted swing at the perpetrator. It earned him guffaws that followed him into the woods. "Can't blame me," he called over his shoulder. "Frank's beans like to killed me." Eldridge watched the shadow shuffle through the pines in his direction. The man moved between the boles and paused yards away. He heard the jingle of a belt and the rustle of fabric as the cowboy squatted. He wasn't sure which one this was. It didn't sound like Pete Brown, but he couldn't be sure. The Marshal considered just shooting the man. A single shot would draw the rest of them in, guns blazing. Eldridge pulled his legs up under him and gulped past a wave of nausea. He held his hand against the rough bark of a pine tree until he could get steady. He took his hand away and let it drift to the grip on his pistol. It kept traveling further down and slid around the worn handle of a Jim Bowie knife sheathed at his waist. He slipped the blade free. The noise stopped from the man. He scrounged around for leaves and grass. "Hey Barnes!" one of the men by the fire shouted. "Did something die out there? We can smell your shit from here." "Just trying to remind you of your cooking," Barnes screamed back with a giggle. He stood up straight and gripped his britches with both hands. Eldridge lunged forward and lurched across the distance between them. Barnes gurgled out a small yelp of fear as the darkness surged toward him. The marshal plunged the blade across the man's neck. He bubbled a protest and let go his pants as both hands gripped his neck and tried to stem the spurts of dark liquid that squirted out with each pump of his heart. "You gonna sleep out there, Barnes?" one of the men called. Barnes tried to step toward the voice, step toward the fire. His pants drooped and slid around his ankles. The outlaw tripped and fell onto his face. Eldridge heard the skitter of his boots in the dirt as the man bled out on the forest floor. After a moment, he went still. The marshal reached out for the tree again and steadied himself upright. He struggled to breath past the pain, and after half a minute, it receded. Not all the way, but enough for him to consider his next move. One man down, 11 outlaws left. Still too many for him, down to one arm as he was. But he was up now, and that was an improvement over being almost face down in the dirt. He took a step back from the body, then another. Movement was easier upright, though painful. The horses shifted on their picket lines on the far side of the camp, as the iron scent of spilled blood drifted on the wind. "Martin, go see what's got those ponies riled up." One of the men stood from by the fire and went to investigate. Eldridge took a small step closer to the trunk of a tree. He didn't think he needed to blend in, but he didn't want to chance it. The man ignored him, or maybe he just ignored the direction of the stench. He moved among the restless beasts, muttering words and patting their necks and haunches. "Barnes! Hey Barnes!" Eldridge didn't glance at the dead man. He was pretty sure he wouldn't answer. "Martin, go check on Barnes while you're out there. He must have shit himself to sleep." "I don't want to see that," Martin yelled back. "You get over and see to him." Eldridge held himself still. It was easy not to breathe, less painful. The man called Martin stalked through the trees. His hands moved from tree to tree, scraping bark and snapping branches. The string of curses the man muttered drifted past Eldridge as he searched the darkness. Martin was inventive, Eldridge had to hand it to him. The marshal hoped the outlaw would find the body. His panic and reaction would draw the others away from the fire. It could buy him the time he needed. That meant the man called Martin needed to stumble across the body, and right now, he was going the wrong way. Eldridge debated for less than a second. Speed was his hallmark. Fast with his hand, quick on the draw. He took 2 steps after the man, got lightheaded and almost pitched over. He needed a drink. Water or whiskey. Food too, and healing. When he made it back to Fort Smith, you planned to spend a week in Miss Kitty's bed. Maybe 3. He gulped a shallow breath and stumbled after Martin before the outlaw got too far ahead. "Who's that?" Martin heard him coming. "Flint. I ain't scared." "You scared of the dark now, Martin?" one man yelled from the fire. Martin grunted in surprise. "Which one of you bastards is out here?" Eldridge lurched toward the man's voice, boots scraping the ground. A bullet cracked the air. Eldridge slid behind a tree. "What the hell are you shooting at out there?" "Whichever of you sons of bitches are trying to spook me." "Hell, Martin, that's Barnes fooling you." "Barnes?" It came out like a curse. "Uck," Eldridge muttered as he tottered toward Martin. "Son of a bitch," the man said as he spied the giant shadow. "You got me," he laughed. "I do," Eldridge agreed. He stepped closer and jammed his knife into Martin's throat. The outlaw tried to bring his gun to bear. Eldridge caught it with his injured arm. Pain racked his shoulder and side. The bad man's hand clenched and spasmed as he died. The pistol barked once, twice, and the man dropped. He took Eldridge's knife in the fall. "You almost shot me." "What are you doing, Martin?" Stars exploded behind Eldridge's eyes. He dropped to his knees as dizziness overtook him. "I don't like it," a voice yelled out in the dark. He felt around for the man's pistol with his good hand and shoved it in his belt. The knife was gone, knocked away in the fall. Barnes. Martin. He could hear the men moving, voices echoing off the trees. Spread out. 2 down, he thought as he crawled. He wasn't sure if he was crawling toward the noise or scrabbling from it. The men searching for their friends made no effort to be silent. Their thick boots crunched on the pine needles, cracked off the shale that had meandered from the ridge to points lower. His hand hit one the size of a dinner plate and slid off sideways. Eldridge crashed down, cracked his chin on the hard earth. Over here, someone shouted above him. He didn't have time to hurt, time to wait, time to waste. The man was over him, and on him in an instant. That tin star some bitches over here. He reached down and yanked Eldridge over by his collar. The marshal rolled over with the pull. He swung his pistol up and sent a shot into the man's chest. Flames licked from the end of the barrel, illuminating an expression of fear and surprise. The bright orange flicker sent starbursts in Eldridge's eyes, blinding him for a moment. Not so for the men in the woods around him. His shot revealed his position and the scattered band of outlaws began shooting in his direction. They aimed too high. If they were smarter, he would have been dead. Or deader than he felt, and it was close. He shoved his heels into the dirt and pushed for space. His worn boots scraped divots in the ground as he shoved away from the dead body. Bullets whizzed through the trees and careened off the trunks. He felt the flitter of bark and needles showering down on him. Hold up, one of them figured out. Hold up. Go get some torches so we can see what we're shooting at. Eldridge kept moving, slower now that the fuselage of bullets echoed silence through the woods. He felt every scratch against the dirt betrayed his position, but no one took a shot. Instead, he heard the pounding of footsteps racing past him a few yards through the pines, and the sound of men yanking burning wood from the fire. He hoped they would just wander back, trying to use the end of the lit sticks for vision, but one of the outlaws grabbed the others and wrapped cloth over the end of the branches, creating torches. Eldridge moved further still, head aimed downhill. He could feel the pull of the wound in his shoulder, and the fresh slick of warm liquid leaking down his armpit. He must have banged the wound open when he landed. It still hurt to breath, but from his back, there wasn't much use for it, just an aching need to put a few more yards between him and where the dancing blobs of flame bounced in the woods. He bounced his other shoulder off a pine and winced through the struggle to sit up and rest his back against the trunk. He got Martin. 5 of them gathered around the body. Eldridge spied them lined up. Not ear to ear, as he had once hoped, for a one-shot kill. But lined up nonetheless, a narrow grouping under the umbrella of flickering torchlight as they examined their shot friend. The marshal lifted the pistol and steadied his shaking arm. Pete! One of the men screamed into the darkness up the hill. He got Martin. And he's gonna get you, you don't shut up, you dumb bastard, Pete yelled back. Eldridge obliged. 4 of the outlaws fell. The recoil and strain of holding the heavy iron was too much for him to hit the 5th. That shot went wide, careened off in the darkness, and Eldridge didn't have the breath to even mutter a curse at the wasted shot. The flames from his barrel had betrayed him again. Even with the one man howling as he ran away from his fallen comrades, the rest zeroed in on the marshal. And again, they shot too high. Eldridge fell to the side and groaned as a bullet slammed into the soft pine bark where his head had just been. He side-crawled away, clenching his pistol in his tired hand. He could hear the men running toward him again, this time closer than they had been before. They crashed through the game trail underbrush, branches snapping, leaves creaking at their swift passage. He slid down the hill and hit the shallow flat space that passed for the narrow valley between the ridges. The soft pine needles cushioned his landing. The marshal was on the same level as the fire. He could see the dark outlines of their horses between him and the flames. They nervous mounts danced and whinnied against their tethers, eyes wide, almost glowing in the semi-darkness. He didn't want to get under those hooves, not the way they were stamping the ground and prancing back and forth. They would do short work of him and he would end up looking like the wrong end of a stampede. But the thick bodies of the horses gave him an idea. Eldridge pushed himself up, and didn't even have to try to stay hunched over as he made his feet. Standing full hurt his side too much. He tried to recall what a full breath felt like, back before blue starbursts were his constant companion, but he feared he may never take a whole breath again. Better half, than whole, he told himself in a huffed pant as he stumbled toward the horses. The smell of him sent them almost in a frenzy. He smelled of stale blood and fresh, and the stink of riding in darkness. One yanked against his tether so hard, He almost bent the small pine in half. Then Eldridge's hand on was his neck, stroking, cooing soft whispered words from the half-raised man shape. The marshal moved between two of the horses, and sent up a quick prayer. If they moved together, he would be crushed. The pain of it would knock him out and he would be trampled. Or the bandits would find him and finish the job. The men hunting him by torchlight moved through the trees. He could see the flames appearing and disappearing between the boles as they moved in a hunt for him. Dumb, he snorted and hoped he didn't say it out loud. They hadn't learned their lesson from the other 4 dead son of a bitches laying where he shot them. He grabbed a mane and used the horse to haul himself upright. It didn't hurt much until he tried to breath, and then it was like getting kicked by the big animal shivering under him. He laid his arm across the swayback and tried to steady his aim. He could see a head bobbing under a torch as a man slid the last few steps to the shallow dale and stood looking at the agitated animals. Eldridge couldn't tell who he was, his features lost in the shadow of his hat brim. It didn't matter to him which one it was. Another dead bad man, he thought, and pulled the trigger. The horse jumped and sent him bouncing back into the one behind him. That animal shoved back, yanking on the tether at the darkness, the noise, the smell. Eldridge could feel the fear washing off the beast like a swampy musk, infecting the others around it, turning the air into a muggy clinging thing. He grabbed a fistful of mane and struggled to stay upright as he studied the landscape beyond. The man was dead, no doubt about that. The torch lay next to his head. Half of his face was sheathed in blood that glittered black under the torchlight. The shot drew the others back to camp. Eldridge heard them pounding down the hill, their yells echoing among the branches. A shot whizzed overhead like an angry nighttime hornet, and he ducked. The noise and chaos was too much for the beast behind him. It yanked the tether again and broke the line. The giant body slammed against the marshal as the horse wheeled about and galloped away from the blood and noise. 3 more panicked with it and raced away. He bounced off them as they passed, knocking against him, shoving him aside. One long arm reached up and caught a rein. It almost jerked him off his feet, and that would have been the end of him, he knew. As it was, the leather bit jerked the horse's head to one side and almost flipped him over as he twirled around. Eldridge didn't have energy to jump on him, so he kept the horse spinning, putting the body between him and the bad men as they reached the bottom of the canyon and started toward him. They didn't shoot as they advanced. His head throbbed, he couldn't breath, couldn't count the bodies as they moved toward him. They dropped their torches, but the miniature fires flickered behind them. It wasn't quite an outline, just a dark shadow moving against a less dark background. His lungs hurt, his head pounded, he couldn't breath. Eldridge tried to still the horse as one of the men sent a shot his direction. It lunged away from him, exposed him for the next one. He dropped his own gun, yanked the stolen dead man's pistol from his belt and fired off 3 quick rounds. The 3 outlaws closest to him pitched over backwards as the bullet slammed into them. The second one squeezed off a wild shot that winged into the woods. Eldridge dropped the empty gun and stumbled behind the horse as it tried to get away. A bullet plowed into the animal, then another as the last 2 bandits tried to kill him. The marshal made a tree and ducked behind it. "Pete," one of the outlaws gurgled. "We got him, Gus," Pete yelled. Gus dropped to his knees and pitched forward on his face. The wild shot from a member of his own gang had caught him in the chest. Pete howled in rage and anguish as he realized what happened. He fell to his knees and cradled his dead brother in his arms. Eldridge peeked around the side of the tree and back again, took in as much as he could. He wasn't going to get a better chance. He stumbled up the hill, making for the ridge line. The odds had been evened up, but now he was out of bullets, and injured. He hurt worse than when he started. Maybe the horse had jarred something loose, or knocked something inside awry. All he knew is that breathing was nigh on impossible. He took shallow pants in and out of his nose, and the wind wasn't enough. His head spun at the pain, at the lack of breath, at the whirlwind of battle action behind him. "Marshal!" Pete screamed at his back. "I'm coming to kill you." Eldridge wanted to taunt him. A taunted man made bad decisions. He couldn't get his voice to work. All he could do was push up the hill, 2 steps at a time. He heard the man give chase. Heard the boots move faster, catching up to him. He tried to speed up. His foot slipped on a piece of shale and slid out from under him. Eldridge caught himself on the elbow again, the bounce knocking all his wind out, so much he couldn't even gasp. He slid backwards down the hill, twirling sideways as his boot caught on a sapling and spun him around. Pete laughed. "Got you, you damned bastard." Eldridge fetched up against another tree that arrested his fall. He could see the outlaw climb up and even with him, watched the man stalk across the ground toward him. He held his breath, not that there was much to hold, and bit back a scream as he lifted his Henry rifle, cranked a round into the chamber and blew a hole in the man's chest. Pete slung a shot in his direction as he tipped over backwards and slid back the way he came. The bullet slammed into the pine and shot chips of bark and went into his eye and gouged out a chunk of skin next to his brow. Eldridge fell back and stared up at the stars between the pine boughs. 12 men, he sniffed as he drifted. It took 12 men to kill me. The pain drifted away as he closed his eyes. Chapter 4. It hurt. Breathing. Opening his eyes. One eye was crusted shut when he tried to blink it clear, and he remembered Pete. Eldridge rolled his head to one side, slow. He didn't know if his eye was gone forever, but he wasn't seeing anything out of it at the moment, not even a blur. He had to roll his head to see anything at all. Pete sprawled against a tree 15 feet below and just back from where he was. The light was gray dawn, that time when the sun was getting ready to go peek over the horizon and wash the world in new colors. Right now, the gray was good enough. Flies buzzed the hole in the man's chest. Eldridge wondered how he managed to keep breathing through the night himself. His chest felt like there was a hole in it, maybe more than one. It took a quarter of an hour to make it upright, and another half hour to hobble down the hill, one slow labored step at a time. Each step required a stop to rest and wait for his head and breath to catch up. He made the burned out remains of the campfire. A dead horse served as a small windbreak, and the dead bodies of the outlaws littered the shallow dale behind it. His horse stood by the ashes of the fire and whickered at the sight of him. "Couldn't bring help?" he muttered, his words as slow as his steps. The horse neighed and was joined by a second that trotted up from the trees on the other side of the ridge. Eldridge reached his own horse, and used his only good hand to open a saddlebag after he shoved his Henry into the sheath on the third slow, labored try. He pulled out a skin of water and drained it, then shoved the empty sack back into the bag. He replaced it with a bottle of whiskey and medicated some of the pain away. Then he grabbed a rope and worked his way up the hill to Pete. He looped the end around the dead man's boot and cinched it. The going was slow and hard, the task made harder still by only using one hand and one eye. But since no one was shooting at him, he figured he had a little time. Besides, Pete wasn't going to complain about it. He made his way down the hill again, step by step, and used the second horse to haul the body through the trees. It took almost an hour to rig it so the horse was dragging Pete and his outlaw brother. They weren't strapped across the back of the horse, and the journey wasn't going to make them pretty by any means. But he blood-stained flier in his coat pocket didn't say bring him back pretty. He had to use a fallen log to launch one leg over the back of his horse, and hauling himself upright nearly caused him to pass out again. Still, he knew a trading house a few hours from here, a place where he could rest and get some doctoring. And the man was a trader with a cold cellar, so he could put the bodies in storage until he was better, then take them in for the reward. The morning sun shifted toward the middle of the sky and his stomach gurgled. Eldridge took a long, slow sip of whiskey to quiet it down, and clicked his horse to get going. He felt the tug of the lead line to the other horse, and heard the two bodies scraping across the ground as they were dragged along. A couple of hours and he could get some food. Some doctoring and some rest. The end. Get to know Eldridge Sample, U.S. Marshal and Judged by 12, a Fort Smith Western adventure, and keep reading in Carried by 6, the next installment in the series.